Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gear Priority Podcast. I'm your host, Justin, and today we are diving deep into sleeping comfort while backpacking. More specifically, the technologies and features that are used in sleeping pads to make them more comfortable and what you should look for in a sleeping pad to maximize your comfort. I'm joined today by Barry Roberts and Ryan Andrist with Sea to Summit, which is a company that makes popular sleeping pads like the Etherlight XT. Welcome, both of you. I've chatted with you, Barry, a few times about sleeping pads, and we've definitely got nerdy about them and had some great conversations. I know you're passionate and knowledgeable about sleeping pads. But I wanted to kind of give you guys the opportunity to introduce yourselves. Where are you located? How long have you been with Sea to Summit, and what your specific roles are at Sea to Summit? Maybe we'll start with you, Barry.
Okay, well, I've been with Sea to Summit for a long time, Justin. It's coming up on 18 years now, and a lot has changed in that time. We've introduced a lot more products and a lot more technical products, and my role is essentially to be the person who will take the ideas that our design team has, our engineers have, and find ways to explain that to normal consumers, and vice versa. I work a lot with consumers and taking their ideas and feeding them back to the design team. So my business card has a number of different titles on it, one of which reads Technical Resources Manager, which is sort of techie speak. The other one says Minister of Education. So with that, I think Ryan should say something worthwhile.
Barry, you are absolutely the Minister of Education. Justin, any sort of training that we do or product knowledge or even product comparisons, all of that comes from Barry. So there's zero credit anywhere but with Barry. So on my end, my name is Ryan Andrist. I have been here at Sea to Summit for, I think I'm at about 18 months now. So just over a year and a half. It has... predominantly my role is the brand and marketing director, but there's always a lot of jack of all trades type things. So anything from social media to video editing to whatever needs to be done. When you're a small organization, you get your hands dirty in a lot of different places. So my background stems from a lot of some other who shall not be named outdoor organizations that I have worked with in the past. And then, like I said, I've been here about 18 months, so I'm excited to be part of this. Thank you, Justin.
Awesome. And where are the both of you calling in from? You can you don't have to give your address, but just like a general location area.
Both of us are in Colorado, so our North America headquarters are in Boulder, Colorado.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. So you're one of the few that's not in Seattle.
Exactly.
In the outdoor.
You got to pick one. You're either in the Pacific Northwest or you're in the Front Range of Colorado.
Yeah, nice. I think I'd probably pick Colorado. That'd probably be where I'd want to be coming in from.
It's a great place to be.
So at the beginning of every episode, we do some rapid fire questions just to get to know the both of you. We'll just kind of, as you kind of are able to answer the question, just jump in. We got 4 here. The first one being, what are your favorite 2 outdoor activities?
Oh, backcountry skiing. Can I pick the same one twice?
No.
Yeah.
Backcountry skiing and backpacking. I really enjoy solo backpacking. I like Brown & Company.
Yeah. What about you, Ryan?
On my end, that's the problem with being in Colorado is there's so many options for us to do. That's why we live here, right? I am outside of the skiing part of it. I am a snowboarder, so you can call me those things. But I'm a big fan of the weekend camping. So it is oftentimes myself, the dog, the spouse, getting out and spending some time away from all of the rigmarole that happens in the Denver area.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, it's those are a good combo, especially when you live in the mountains. Having a winter activity and then something a little bit more geared towards summertime and 3 seasons is nice. I think everything you guys named, I'm definitely on board with. Those are great activities. And this one might be a tougher one, but what's your one favorite product that Sea to Summit makes? If you had to pick one,
Ryan, you're up.
So it's funny you asked that because we just came off of a sales meeting here for all of North America, and actually globally. We had a ton of folks in town, and throughout that meeting, I preached nonstop that having the Aeros Premium Camp Pillow is by far the best product that you should have in your gear kit. It will change your life.
It's a good one, especially with the sticker, the pillow lock system, just to keep it locked on there. Pretty solid.
So, Justin, you would expect me to have something that can be empirically measured because I like that kind of thing. So, measured by the number of products that I have given away, my absolute favorite would be the EVAC Dry Sack. For 2023, the name changes to EVAC Dry Bag, but the concept is the same. It's a dry sack that you can squeeze air out of the base.
Yeah, and that's because it uses eVent on the bottom.
Using eVent, which is air permeable, and the number of times I've been in a ski hut, packing up on the last day, and I'll put my sleeping bag in, sit on it, and somebody will stare in wide-eyed amazement. What, you're squeezing air out of it? Yes. Oh, why don't you take it home? Come on. So I literally have given away, I can't count how many, which is an open invitation to your listeners. If they ever find themselves in a ski hut with a guy with a funny accent, they should look around to see if there's a free dry bag in there.
That's a good open invitation.
There you go.
All right, number 3. This one's a little bit more related to the topic at hand for today, and that's: are you a side sleeper or a back sleeper?
I sleep all over the place. I'm a kinetic sleeper.
You're a barrel roller.
Oh, yeah. I hadn't heard the term barrel roller. But barrel seems very orderly in comparison to I'd love to see time-lapse photography of some of the positions I get into, but yeah, all over the place.
All over the place. Okay, what about you, Ryan?
I am a classic vampire pose. I do not move from sleeping on my back, hands crossed on my chest, probably my feet crossed at the bottom, and I don't move from that the entire night.
Wow, nice. I'm jealous. That's a easy way to live. Just being a back sleeper.
It works for me.
Number 4, and maybe this is more a question for both of you, because I don't think there's necessarily you're probably not gonna have individual answers for us. Maybe you will. We'll see. But why doesn't Sea to Summit include the pillow lock stickers with the pillows, or sell them separately from the sleeping pads? It's a tougher question, but I get asked it all the time from my viewers.
No, there were multiple questions within that. Obviously, part of the concept here is to encourage somebody to buy a Sea to Summit sleeping mat. We have to be honest about that. But also, if you have a sleeping mat from another brand and you really want some pillow lock stickers, send us an email. We'll take care of you. In Europe, they actually sell them. We generally give them to people. We make arguably as Ryan has said, the absolute go-to pillow, and we want people to be able to attach that to their mat. Maybe during our discussion, you'll hear some reasons why we think we also make a pretty fair sleeping mat as well to go with it. So the ideal combination would be both.
That's a good answer, and yeah, good to know that people can send email. I know I think it's probably good to kind of have a little bit of a gate there, because I know some sleeping pads they just won't work well together. You won't be able to use the stickers properly on the sleeping pads necessarily that aren't made by Sea to Summit.
And do we take care of that on a case-by-case basis? We put a lot of time and effort into staff training, so that anybody who answers an email, they're not just sending out cut and paste answers. If they think that there's a possibility that two products will not work together, they will dig further until they've found the correct answer. So shout out to our customer service team. They're pretty good at that.
Yeah, and Justin, similar to your question about how people sleep, as you can imagine, between wanting to fix your pillow to your mat or people that stuff their pillow into the hood of their sleeping bag, oftentimes you're kind of moving in one space or the other. So we have the stickers included with the mat, because that's a big indication here. Use this with the mat versus, you might buy the pillow because you're just stuffing it in the hood of your your bag, and then we don't want to send them along with that. But as Barry said, customer service is awesome. If someone reaches out, we'll take care of them.
Yeah, I've always had good experiences with Sea Summit customer service, even before I had an audience and a YouTube channel and all that fun stuff. So I can definitely vouch for that. So that brings us into our main topic at hand, and that's talking about sleeping pads and specifically sleeping pad comfort. If people have been following the podcast, we did an episode recently on R value and talking a bit about sleeping pad warmth, but today we're going to focus on the comfort aspect. I think that's, for me, that's the most important thing for a sleeping pad is making sure it's comfortable enough. I'm like you, Barry. I'm on my side, I'm on my back, I'm on my front, I'm on my head, and all over the place as I'm sleeping. So it really is important to have a sleeping pad that makes everything work. And I'm curious, because Sea Summit in my mind is one of the companies that has really seems to make comfort a priority with your sleeping pads. So maybe kind of confirm or deny that, but how has Sea Summit why was that identified as a priority for sleeping pads in the development of your pads?
Well, like so many things with Sea Summit, it was an engineering breakthrough. It wasn't somebody sitting around sketching out the questions for the next focus group. That's not the way that we've built products. It's not the way that we run the company. And a couple of engineers had a real breakthrough moment at separate points, but essentially they were looking at how air mats worked. And you have to remember that we're talking a few years ago now. It took us 4 years to develop air mats before they came to market, and we launched in 2015. So we're going back 12, 13 years now. And there were quite a few mats on the market that were very simple constructions. They were big, largely tubular form. And the engineers who had the breakthrough were thinking about how you could build a mat that had a level of stability, which, not in comparison to large tubes, but they took their inspiration from pocket spring mattresses. And of course, if most people have seen the commercial where there's the old-fashioned mattress with the small number of very large springs, and it's quite wobbly and unstable. And then they blend into the new technology, which is the hundreds of very small springs. And to underscore the point, they'll put a glass of wine on one of the springs. On the old-fashioned mattress, of course, you tip over the wine. On the new one, you don't. And that's what they built. They built an air-filled version of that concept. And so even in our simplest mats, if we were to take the ultralight mat, in regular size, there's 181 separate air-filled springs. And once they do, and it took a while to perfect, like I say, it was 4 years in development. But once they'd figured out how to make this work, when you lay on it, you're not laying on 5 or 6 tubes or 30 or 40 baffles. You're laying on hundreds of individual points, and each of them suspend your weight very effectively. Each of them mold and adapt to the curves and contours of your body. Once you've tried it, you will. Most people, you can't put empirical numbers behind comfort. It's a subjective thing. But the overwhelming majority of people who've tried it say, yeah, this is actually a more comfortable sleep experience. But it truly was an engineering breakthrough.
And was that engineering breakthrough was it targeted towards creating a more comfortable sleeping pad, or were there a bunch of different initiatives that were happening at the time, and then that was just one of the main ones?
They were just kicking ideas around to begin with, some of which are laudable but hopelessly unrealistic, which is what happens with engineering, and some of which eventually very quickly moved to that idea of a large number of dot welds which subdivide up the chamber. It was... We need about a 3-hour podcast to really go into how they got to this turning into a marketable product. But in the very early stages of prototypes, especially if you look at what was on the market currently in 2010, 2011, it was very clear that they'd come up with something that was radically different. and not just different for different sake, different and worked better different.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of paint a picture for the people that are listening and maybe have never seen or have troubles imagining a Sea to Summit sleeping pad. A lot of them have kind of I like to describe it as like a dimpled pattern or quilted pattern, where you have these points that are a little bit lower, and then you have these raised areas. And I think we'll get into a little bit more kind of why those two components are important. But that's the kind of breakthrough that you're talking about, right, Barry? Is having that kind of dimpled or quilted pattern with the kind of pocket spring type technology.
The pockets between those dimples, we call them air-sprung cells, which I realize is a little confusing. If you think of them as air-filled springs, it is the sheer number of them. Like I say, in our simplest mat, the ultralight, 181 of them. If you go up to a comfort light, there's 331. You go to the comfort plus, which is 2 separate layers, you're at 548. And I haven't got to the large size or the rectangular sizes. It goes up from that. And it doesn't take too much imagination to figure out that 400 or 500 separate points of suspension is going to be more comfortable. That's kind of a given these days, because so many companies have adopted either something more or less identical, and REI would be one. They used to have their best-selling lightweight pad was made out of a tubular construction. They dropped it and came out with one that looked an awful lot like a Sea to Summit mat, and we're very grateful for the compliment. But it's indicative of the fact that the more you can subdivide an air-filled chamber down into smaller parts, the more stable it's going to be. It's not about thickness. We can cover thickness because that's a bit of a myth.
Yeah, I'd love to in a second here, and I love that the kind of air spring, and I guess that makes sense for the air sprung name now. Where, but each of those little raised areas and the lower areas, it creates an air spring type scenario in order to relieve pressure points, and kind of building off of what you just mentioned, because thickness I think is something that people talk about a lot, and even with some of the advertising that comes out with pads, a lot of it has to do with pad thickness. But with pads coming in kind of all shapes and sizes, what are the key design factors? You touched on kind of the baffling system. Are there any other ones that are key for making a comfortable sleeping pad?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. Number one is shape. And I'm trying not to make this sound like an infomercial, but we decided very early on that we were going to have in our regular size a 21.5-inch mat, because the 20-inch mats that are on the market, almost all of the testers came back and said they're great and they're really light, but my elbows hang on the ground, which is a little bit contrary to what you're trying to achieve. So the shape of the mat is quite important. We will hopefully touch on women's specific sleeping mats a little bit later. That's an extremely important point with a woman's mat. The other aspect is the face fabric itself, and that's where you run into some engineering challenges, because on the one hand it would be great to have a soft, quiet fabric, and there are such things about. The difficulty of using those softer, often textured fabrics, and especially polyesters, is they're nowhere near as strong as a nylon, and especially not as strong as a high thread count nylon. So in an ideal world, you would be able to build a mat that would have a very, very soft finish. You'd be able to run your hand over it and it would feel like flannel sheets on your bed at home, but you can't. And Sea to Summit's very much an engineering-driven company, and the engineers, God bless them, went for strength over that easy tactile feel. But there's no question there are some really good sleeping mats or sleeping pads on the market that use softer fabrics. They also tend to be a little bit quieter than ours. There's a little more contact noise when you have a very high thread count fabric, simply because it ends up being smooth, and most people have rubbed the surface of a balloon and know the squeaky noises that come out of it. Contact noise comes out of a lot of air mats for the same reason, and softer fabrics would make a mat, not just subjectively, but just as far as tactile feel is concerned, it would make it more comfortable. It's not part of our lineup for the simple reason that it's nowhere near as strong.
Yep. What about the thickness? Let's chat about that a little bit, because I think that's we touched on with the baffling system, and then I think what I hear from a lot of people, and I think maybe this harkens back to when pads before I think we started seeing a lot of pads with kind of good baffling systems. People would have to release a lot of air out of their pads in order to feel comfortable, and then they need a thicker pad in order to be able to release enough air, and then their hips are touching if it's not thick enough. So do you have any comments on that? Because I think that's the thought process I see a lot of people going down.
No, you're absolutely spot on. Once upon a time, thick was everything. It's a very simple prospect when you're trying to sell something. If you equate thickness with comfort, I'll look back to that in a second. But the first company to figure out that there was a better way of doing things was Thermarest, and they put the Neo Air on the market. And if you were to cut one in half, you would see a lot of triangular sections, which were the baffles, and they were made out of reflective material with a film that ran down the middle, and so there's very little top to bottom air contact. You have something which, because it's reflective, the large part of your radiant heat is going to be reflected back to you. It was a huge breakthrough. The mat, nobody seemed to get concerned about the fact that it was barely 3 inches thick, because they just looked at it and said, clearly this is something very, very different. And it was, and kudos to Thermarest. They're very, very good engineers. Some brave person signed off on an awful lot of RF welds on the inside of that thing. However, it didn't change that there was still a widespread perception that thicker is always more comfortable. And what I would say to somebody is the primary thing that you need to engineer into a mat, whether you do it with baffles, as Thermarest did, or whether you do it with the cell type construction that Cedar Summit did, stability is everything. And I would challenge anybody. I mean, it's interesting. We've actually done sort of blindfold tests and had people lay on a mat, and if it's correctly inflated, they will be convinced that they're sleeping on a really thick pad. You take the blindfold off and they say, oh, good Lord, it's 2 inches. How is this possible? Because it's about stability. Having said that, the Etherlight mat that you mentioned is thicker. It's just shy of 4 inches. It wasn't designed to be a thicker pad per se. They merely took those dimples and moved them apart. They're joined together by a loop of a flexible material. And the idea of that was very simple. Because the dimples now, A, they're farther apart, and B, they don't have the effect of turning the fabric between each dimple into a complete hemisphere. This is difficult. I should have a graphic here, but trust me, the standard dimpled Cedar Summit sleeping mat, each space between the dimples is a hemisphere. And in the Etherlight, it isn't. It's a gentle curve, and so it uses less fabric. So our Etherlight is made of exactly the same laminate as our most comfort-oriented, heavier mats, but there's much less fabric, and therefore it's a lot lighter. As a side effect of that, it also happens to be thicker, but the intention wasn't to build a thick pad. It was to build an air-sprung cell mat that happened to have that quality of being lighter. And some people will say, well, it's exactly what I'm looking for. It's got that kind of sort of plush thing, or, I've always wanted a pad like that because I'm a side sleeper. If that's where people intersect with it, it's fine. What I would say to them is just count the number of air-filled springs. Look at it. You've got 92 points of suspension on that thing. That's what's keeping you comfortable.
Yeah, and that's interesting to know that was kind of that the weight was a priority over the thickness of that pad, and it was the design of the having the air sprung technology with the weight that led to that level of thickness. So that's really interesting to know. And I definitely, when I talk to people and recommend how they should be sleeping on their sleeping pads, I think something that always comes up is the inflation as far as how it relates to R value. And I let people know that if as you start deflating, you're also decreasing the warmth effectiveness of that pad. So if you can get a pad that's comfortable, fully inflated, you're also going to be warmer. So, and I find I've slept on dozens and dozens, too many to count, pads out there, and the AirSprang technology and the dimpled system is definitely the most comfortable. And I sleep on all those pads that I have fully inflated 100%, and have no problems with comfort. And I'm like I said, side sleeper, back sleeper, all over the place.
Hey, Justin, I was gonna throw in there. I think some of the stuff that you're seeing and part of that thickness conversation is also based on the fact that, you know, growing up, I remember the days when you would have egg crates or just a thick foam piece, that the more foam, the more comfortable what it was that you were able to sleep. And as Barry was saying, that stability that is now built into these AirSprang cells is what is really making that lighter, more packable piece than what we used to carry around when we were younger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my first pad I ever bought myself was a 3/4 length, 1 inch thick, self-inflating mat, and I wish that was thicker at the time for sure.
Yeah, sure you did.
I think it's just worth quickly throwing in, we do have to draw a distinction between a self-inflating mat and an air mat, because a self-inflating mat has a foam core, and therefore it's inherently stable. It doesn't have any baffles in it, doesn't need them. You're not trying to subdivide a large chamber. You're putting a large block of foam in an airtight wrap and putting a valve on the end of it. All self-inflating mats are therefore as stable as they come. And because they're made of foam, the thicker they are, in actual fact, the more comfortable. So thickness does play a role in a self-inflating mat, which, because of its foam core, it's not the prime driver in an air-filled mat. And you're going to get tired of me saying this, but you have to watch closely when somebody turns over on a mat, and you can see some unstable constructions. Some of them, it almost looks as if the thing is bouncing. That can't be comfortable. It's certainly not. It's not good for trying to keep warm air underneath your torso. But we can go off down different rabbit holes, and I'll leave it at that. I'm assuming for today's discussion, we're talking primarily about air mats and not self-inflating mats.
Yeah, primarily air mats, especially for that weight factor. And I think you just gave me an idea. I think about those videos that you see that people record getting like a ball in the face in slow motion, and their face distorts. I'm curious to have you guys done that with sleeping pads, like high, like very slow motion, someone tossing and turning on the pad to kind of see how things kind of move in different pads?
I don't know if they've done it with high-speed cameras. I will have to find out. Let me get back to you on that one.
It's something that now is just in the back of my mind for a YouTube video. So that might be happening, some high-speed tossing and turning on sleeping pads and seeing how it affects different ones. I'll let you know how it goes. I think you touched on some trade-offs that have to be made sometimes when designing a comfortable sleeping pad. I think weight can be an easy one, and we kind of see that as something that comes into play. If you just brought to go to extreme example, you just threw your mattress from home on your back and lug that into the backcountry, that'd be comfortable but very heavy. And I think we can see that with a bunch of, even as we get down to like car camping pads and things like that. Are there other trade-offs, maybe specifically from in Sea to Summit's experience, that you have to make when designing a comfortable pad? I think you mentioned durability as well with regards to the fabrics. Instead of having a softer fabric, you go with a more durable kind of nylon that may be slightly noisier. Any other ones that you can think of?
Something that goes hand in hand with that. The fabric itself is not airproof. I think there's a widespread misunderstanding. Just because polyesters and nylons are synthetic fabrics, people may have the impression that the fabric itself will stop air passing through it. It will not. you need to put something on it, some kind of barrier to make it airproof. And there are a number of different technologies. At the time when we were developing mats, there were still coated products on the market. And you have to shrug your shoulders and ask who thought that let's back up a second. When you have an air mat, there's a lot of dynamic loads that go on it inside it. When you roll over onto a weld, you actually decrease the amount of load on that weld, but you've increased the load somewhere else. The air pressure is constant throughout the mat, but the loading on the welds changes. So in an ideal world, you would have a material for the face fabric and for the laminate of your mat that would withstand that. It wouldn't stretch in any way. But you also need to find a way of taking that airproof barrier, whether it be a coating or a film or something else, and attaching it so that it isn't going to become detached. Because the mat is going to lead a very tough existence, which includes, and much less so these days, where pumps are more freely available. But back in the coated days, people were mouth-inflating mats, softening up the airproof barrier, which was a polyurethane coating, and then looking with amazement as after a few uses, the thing would not hold air. It wasn't punctured. That's all the first guess. My pad has popped. It must be some kind of sharp influence from the outside. An awful lot of this, especially in those days, probably the majority of mats that were failing because that coating on the inside had failed. Or the welds had failed because the coating was soft, or the two had combined to fail together. So the better technology is to roll a film onto what's called a face fabric. And again, people are only listening in on Spotify. They're not going to see my hands doing this, but you roll a film together over rollers. There's a film on one side, there's a face fabric on the other, and you stick the two together. That's called a roll-to-roll application. And it's way better than a coating. It's far less likely to become detached. Bear in mind, there are a lot of loads on this. It's something that you have, until you start thinking about how the thing is loaded. There are also shear loads, so they're pulling from side to side. So a lot of mats have failed because either originally the coating failed, or the welds, or then latterly the film became detached and tore, or the welds failed with them. Cedar Summit came up with an entirely different process. We found a manufacturer because we knew that we were going to use a lot more welds than anybody else was. We needed very strong, very stable welds. So there's two types of welding. You can heat weld something together. Works with certain laminates, including those soft textured laminates with a film. But a much stronger weld is an RF weld, and not all laminates can be RF welded together. RF is radio frequency. An RF weld, if it's correctly executed, is incredibly strong. There's an if coming. If the medium that you are welding together is thick enough. And you asked about designing a mat and what some of the challenges are. People will always tell us, oh, you've got a 40 denier by 30 denier fabric, 40 denier threads in one direction, 30 in another. Well, you should use a lighter fabric. You should, maybe a 20 and a 30. And yeah, that would actually save a little bit of weight. But if we really wanted to save weight, that airproof barrier, the bit on the inside that you can't see, you make that thinner. And you can save a lot more weight. Overnight, we could take 50 to 60 grams off of the weight of our sleeping mats simply by making that airproof barrier thinner. I'll tell you how it's done in just a moment. We won't do that because the weld integrity suffers. And we generally don't get weld failures. I think we've had 30 since we've had mats on the market 8 years ago. And the reason for that is that instead of a film and instead of a coating, they use what's called a liquid extruded thermoplastic extrusion to build lamination to build that laminate. So a very wide machine with a very narrow gap in it. The fabric moves underneath it, and liquid thermoplastic urethane is forced through that gap, and it bonds all the way around the fibers, so it doesn't come off. It doesn't ever come off. In 8 years, we've never had a delamination, and we're now no longer the only company who uses liquid extruded lamination, but it was one of the technologies that we put in at launch that I think increased the durability and the reliability of sleeping mats. I'm not sure that we haven't now moved away from that in some cases by making mats lighter than is probably advisable if long-term reliability is your goal.
Is there, so just to kind of recap for people, the material that they see on the outside on their pads, that's a non-air, that's air permeable, it's not airproof, and then put either a laminate or the extruded liquid onto the inside, and that's the coating that makes the mat airproof. And because with the extrusion method, is there a minimum thickness then? Because I think you told me once that that laminate is sometimes, if not occasionally, heavier than the outer face fabric that people see.
It is heavier. And like I say, that's where we could save all the weight. And there is a minimum thickness. We build our mats in a factory that manufactures aeronautical products, including evacuation slides, which kind of have to work first time. And the engineers who control the lamination process will tell you it'd be very easy to go down below a certain spec, but they are reluctant to do so. And trust me, the engineers in Perth don't want to compromise the concept that we have going on. We're wholly aware that there are lighter mats on the market or lighter pads on the market, and that's fine. Some of them are very, very good products. That's not Cedar Summit's primary entry point into the sleeping mat world. We have a reputation for very tough, very durable, very reliable sleeping mats, and we're happy to stick with it.
And I think to kind of bring that back to the comfort aspect, I think a lot of those factors that you mentioned, as far as the lamination technique or the extrusion technique, the way to make the pad airproof, and then also the material that's needed in order to use that technology, all kind of creates some trade-offs that help with durability but may impact comfort as well. I imagine it'd be impossible to use like a 20 denier polyester fabric with the like the RF welding as well as the extrusion lamination, and then still have any sort of durability necessarily.
Well, there are 20 denier fabric mats on the market, and I leave your listeners to determine how reliable they are. If longevity comes into it, there is no question. The stronger you can make a weld and the more stable the laminate that you are welding together, the longer the mat is going to last. I can't promise people that they will never have a failure with a Cedar Summit mat. I certainly can't promise people that they won't get punctures in an air mat. That's not a possibility. But you asked about not compromises, but you asked about trade-offs.
Trade-offs, yeah. Because I think there's always going to be trade-offs.
There's always trade-offs. Yes, we'll be slightly noisier. Yes, we will be heavier. But on the other hand, we have plenty of users who've contacted us after more than 200 nights, one after another, on one of our mats, and they don't look pristine anymore, but they seem to keep working. So that's where we feel that the on the spectrum of things, that's where we belong.
What about with warmth? Because I think that's something for me after comfort. Warmth is a huge warmth, weight, and comfort, kind of like a trifecta of priorities for me with sleeping mats. And I think just to kind of put like with Thermarest pads, like they have one of the best warmth to weight ratios on the market. Don't work for me from a comfort perspective, but they are hitting those other two. And actually, I'm going to throw durability as a fourth one in there as well, because I think that's super important. Like we just spent some time talking about with pads. When you guys were designing like the Ethernet XT, for example, were there efforts to make it warmer, but then hit some roadblocks as far as the trade-offs that were needing to happen because of that?
Cool. Well, I now have to go home and listen to your podcast on R value, because I would love to hear what your guests had to say. Cedar Summit was part of the working group that created the new ASTM standard. and we were massively supportive of that, even when it became apparent that the testing protocol wouldn't favor our particular type of design just because of the pressure that the mats are tested at. That shouldn't sound like sour grapes. We're absolutely supportive of an empirical standard for testing R value. R value isn't the only thing that you need to know about with a sleeping mat, but it's a really good point to begin the discussion. Some other factors just to be aware of. A sleeping pad or a sleeping mat is not warm. It's exactly the same temperature as the ambient air until you put energy into it. And thusly, the bigger the mat, the more volume, the more energy you need to put into it. And that will be true of a Cedar Summit Etherlight, in case you think I'm referencing other brands here. Equally, if you have a mat which is unstable, and you'll hopefully with your high-speed camera, you're going to see what that looks like, you are moving a lot more air back and forth inside the mat, and you tend to warm up the part underneath your torso. In an unstable mat, that warmth gets dissipated. It does not retain. It's not retained inside the mat. So our value, like I say, massively supportive of having a standard. We used to test prior to the ASTM standard. We tested in the EMPA labs in Switzerland. So did XPED. So the two of us were testing to the same protocol, which it turns out through discussions with friends in the industry was essentially the same protocol that Thermarest were using, and REI based their standard on Thermarest. So there once this myth that before the ASTM standard it was Wild West and there was no standardization doesn't hold a lot of water.
I think there's companies that were good actors within talking about sleeping pad warmth, but I think what the interesting factor with R value is that there's now like you have Mountain Equipment Co-op and REI who just basically have said, we're not carrying your product unless you've tested based on this standard. And there's a lot of companies before and even now that kind of just make up our values based on I guess. I doubt they've tested that many pads in that many different conditions out there. But I think that what I've realized with personal experience is that R value, like you said, R value is a kind of good starting point, but there's a lot of factors that affect it. And that's what I found, like even testing sleeping pads with the exact same R value in same conditions, the real world performance can be different once you're out there and you have a human on a pad instead of a hot plate.
That's actually the point that I was coming to. Putting a live human being on top of a mat, especially when there are inconsistencies with the degree to which it's inflated, and differences in the ambient humidity and then the amount of moisture in the ground. There's a lot of variables out there. So R value is part of this whole construct, but it's not the whole thing. You asked specifically, did we run up against barriers when developing the Etherlight? Cedar Summit uses a lofting insulation. We use Thermalite, so it's a polyester material. It's tagged to each of the middle of those dimples, and thus it hangs down from the top of the mat to about halfway. There's a layer laminated onto it, which will reflect back radiant heat, but we prevent the convective heat loss by using that fuzzy polyester. There are some newer designs on the market. Nemo has done a great job in pushing the state of the industry forward. Their space frame gets rid of the polyester, which is where a lot of the weight has gone away. They've got a second layer of a reflective material that I think will make its way into other designs in years to come. Every product has a life cycle. We are now, as we speak, looking at what happens next in sleep. Right now, we are staying with the polyester material, but there's no question if you want to increase the R value without increasing weight, and in fact you wanted to decrease weight, that second layer of the reflective material has an awful lot to offer. Again, in case you think that this was an infomercial on behalf of Cedar Summit, we're more than happy to give you pros and cons of our designs compared to other designs on the market.
Totally, and I think if people want to stick around the end, I'll be asking you guys about where Sea to Summit, what you're working on, and where you're going technology wise. So that's a little teaser. I don't know if you guys will be able to talk too much about it, but if you people want to hear the question asked, then it'll be happening later in the episode. I think as with the warmth, I think I think you mentioned REI using similar, potentially identical system. They introduced that reflective insulation into, I don't know if you can call it insulation at that point, but into their pads, and it's been pretty effective at maintaining like being able to reflect the warmth back to you. I think with the Etherlite XT, what I found is because that polyester layer kind of is in the middle, there's potential for cold air to be coming in from the sides of the pad, especially with how thick it is. I'm not sure if that's factoring in at all.
That's just part of the construction. All mats will have some point, because you have to tag the top of the mat to the bottom in some way, so you don't have a continuous layer. And your observation is absolutely correct. There is the chance for cold air to move through the Etherlite construction. But then that will be true for an awful lot of other brands as well. I'm just trying to be even-handed here.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's when I've thought about the different technologies that are leading to pads that are maybe a little bit warmer, they are also limited by their construction. For instance, like Thermarest, in order to achieve their high warmth to weight ratio, they have to use a certain baffling system, I think, in order to really have that effectively. But then for me, the comfort gets sacrificed in a big way. So I think if people are thinking about sleeping pads and trade-offs, I think, at this point in time, I think we're getting better. And I think we've mentioned a couple of companies that and Sea to Summit, I think, push the comfort aspect in a really big way with the release of the AirSprung technology. But different companies seem to be pushing kind of the warmth aspect, the durability aspect, the comfort aspect, the weight aspect. But it's great to see everyone kind of pushing things, because then everything's getting better, and the consumer really kind of wins in the end.
There's certainly the opportunity for it to improve the breed. I would just suggest to people that they find out the parameters that are most important to them. Honestly, very few people, of course in Canada it's slightly different, but very few people really need much more than an R value of 3. If you're out winter camping, absolutely, there's no question. You get beyond a hard frost and you need an R value of 4 or greater. We felt that as far as R value is concerned, several of our mats are in the 3 to 4 range, and that's probably adequate for most people. But there are other factors that people need to consider when they're buying a mat. Weight is one of them, but so is durability and reliability. Ease of use is another. Noise is another factor, and I've already conceded we're not the quietest mats out there. But there are some mats which are a lot noisier. They're not simply contact noise. There's noise from the insulation on the inside. I would suggest to people, draw your own Venn diagram. What are the things that are most important to you? And if I could just put my Sea to Summit hat on to finish the sentence, just know that we're very, very happy with where we are in the market, specifically when it comes to durability, and specifically when it comes to reliability. So
nice. And when it comes to, so we touched on a bunch of different kind of features of the pads with regards to thickness, that the patterning on top, or the baffling system, width and shape. When I think we all, I think, Barry, you and I have a very similar sleeping style. Ryan, you have a different sleeping style. I think some people are are like you, but maybe they're side sleepers, so they get into the fetal position and they just stay there for the entire night. Are there characteristics that people with different sleeping styles should be paying more attention to when it comes to kind of thickness, width, shape, and the baffling systems? And have you guys tested that when it comes to sleeping pads?
So only to go back to the comment that I made earlier when we were launching the mats, we decided we weren't going to build a 20-inch wide mat. It just didn't seem to make sense. We realized we could have trimmed some weight off to begin with. Beyond that, honestly, Justin, this idea that you have to have a thick pad because you're a side sleeper, it's a very successful marketing tagline. I don't believe, having seen people who couldn't actually see the mat that they were laying on, then getting up and discovering not only was it a lot thinner than they thought, but also that somebody had sneakily put a set of car keys underneath their hips, and they, of course, couldn't feel them. I think everybody owes it to themselves to test a sleeping mat in a store. It's difficult if you're an online purchaser only, but you should get 2 or 3 out and spend as much time as possible, assuming the position that you normally sleep in, and rolling over as much as possible, and seeing how much the mat moves with you and how noisy it is when you move.
For sure. And I think from personal experience, I would probably recommend to people that if you are a side sleeper, I'd probably look more towards pads like the Etherlite XT with that dimpled system on it, because I find it is very, very effective at relieving pressure points where I know people who are back sleepers and can sleep on like a thin foam mat, or it doesn't affect them as much what that top of a sleeping pad looks like. I'm not sure, Ryan, has that been your experience with different sleeping pads? Is there a difference between something like a Thermarest X-Lite baffling system versus an Etherlite XT?
Yeah, I would say that in my experience, there has been a lot of different products like I said earlier, I started out in the day with just like an egg crate or a piece of foam that you had cut out of something and rolled it up. And I slept pretty decent on that. Technology has evolved so much. And obviously, even in this discussion here today, there's so many things that have changed from the days of just those pieces of foam, that as we get into the air mats, I have found very much so that the air sprung cells have been very nice to, so either your shoulder blade points or even kind of on the lower part of your back is not connecting in a space that either is a little sore in the morning or is kind of abrupt in a way that doesn't make it a very comfortable sleep. So I found that the air mats actually work really great. And what I love about the Etherlite is that they're also the insulated options. So if I am out in a colder environment, I have that mat that can cover both bases. So whether I'm doing it in the summer or in more of a third season camping environment.
Yeah. And I think something that I just want to touch on this, because it's something that I have been curious about, and this will kind of probably transition into the next topic as well. That's specific to kind of like women's specific gear that Sea to Summit makes. But with a person's body shape or size, like if those are little air springs with the air sprung technology and with other baffling systems, is there kind of a maximum that like weight or size that can be put on that in order before it kind of gets maxed out, or is there a minimum distance or height that's needed for those cells? I'm just thinking of someone who may be on the heavier side, laying on a pad, and maybe the pad thickness or the height of those air springs might come into play for them.
Important thing with an air mat is if you're putting a heavier load on it, you have to inflate it firmer. So our mats, the Etherlites run at about 0.5 to 0.6 psi. The classic air-strong cell mats are 0.7 to 0.8. If you put, now you're going to get a mixture of pounds and kilos out of me. I'm going to try and do this. I can't. If you put an 80 kilo person on top of that mat, you need to put another 0.1 something, a little less than 0.1 or 0.2 psi into it. You can keep going up. They stopped testing when they got to 260 kilos or something.
Okay. That's how much weight was put on the pad?
But at that point, you'd inflated it really, really firmly. You were up at about 1.8 psi, which is probably more than most people could achieve through mouth inflation, even with a pump. But the welds are rated to 8 psi. So when I mentioned earlier that we're trying to build something for reliability and for durability, that's what we take as an acceptable minimum. The normal pressure that you would run them at is 0.8 at highest, and yet the weld is rated to 10 times that. Honestly, a greater number of questions that we field about maximum load are people asking about self-inflating mats. And I think there's probably a distinction in the end users. But an end user, even on the heavier side, even if you're talking about somebody who's, let me try and do that in pounds for you, is pushing 300 pounds. You can still use an mat, you just would need to inflate it more firmly.
That makes sense. I guess by inflating it, you're kind of stiffening up those springs a little bit, and then it's going to improve the comfort for that heavier weight. So that makes sense to me. And that was something. So I was just curious about. I guess you probably are with some pads that probably is a trade-off. I don't think many pads have when I look at like specs and features, have like a weight limit that's advertised necessarily. So that's information that's more kind of given out when a customer service call is fielded. Yeah. Okay. I wanted to kind of transition that into into women specific sleeping pads quickly here, because Sea to Summit is one of the few companies making specific, especially with sleeping pads. I don't know if there is anyone else making, like, I think there's a couple out there, but not many other making women specific gear. What led to that being something that Sea to Summit wanted to do, and what was the reasoning for it?
Couple of things. We've built the women's specific sleeping bags since as far back as I can remember. We launched sleeping bags in 2010. We launched the first women's specific, certainly by 2016. I can't give you an exact year. It may have been 2015. And I think a woman's specific sleeping bag is quite well and widely accepted by the market. I don't think, if you a little bit of editorial comment, some of them strike me as the same bag but slightly different. That's not the way that we build things. Our sleeping bags are engineered differently from the ground up, as are our sleeping mats. And what was important with the woman specific sleeping bags, which then gave rise to the sleeping mats, was to get the shaping correctly. A woman has narrower shoulders in general, so why not make a narrower shouldered sleeping bag and save some of the weight that the woman has to carry around? She's often a little shorter than a man, so again, we don't need a full length sleeping bag that's designed a unisex bag. It does, a woman can gain from not carrying as much sleeping bag around. But the real genius was to find the correct shaping between the hips and the knees, not because of a woman's physiology, but because of the way a woman sleeps. A woman's pelvis shape means that when she turns on her side, she will generally draw one knee up, and it's called a figure 4 position. And if you don't get that right in a sleeping bag, the woman will press up against the insulation with her knee and with her butt, and by squeezing the insulation flat, obviously we'll get pulled spots. We cracked that code. We did it without ending up with a foot box that was essentially too large for the sleeping bag. So a lot of time went into that. And as an extension of that, Sea to Summit believes very firmly that you don't buy a sleeping bag, you buy a sleep system. It's not a marketing tagline. It's as essential as if you went to buy a pair of trail runners, nobody would take you seriously if you said you were going to keep your cotton socks on and go running. That they'd say, look, the layer next to your skin has to work with the shoes. And oh boy, you look at your feet, you could probably use some insoles. So let's talk super feet. And you very quickly build a system. And that's a common philosophy. It's common in the layering principle in clothing. For some reason, when it comes to sleeping bags, people tend to think of a sleeping bag as a monolithic product. We don't. We've always thought of sleeping bags, sleeping bag liners, and sleeping mats as all being part of a harmonious, holistic system. And so it wasn't a marketing decision to build women-specific sleeping mats, plural, by the way. There are some companies who have one. REI does a good job here in the US. There are a number of women's specific sleeping mats, but we have 7 because we wanted to give the ultralight woman camper, and we wanted to give the comfort-oriented woman camper, and we wanted to give the travel-oriented camper an option that would work for them. In addition to the shaping, which would mirror that same concept with the sleeping bags widest between the hips and the knees to allow that figure 4, you also get more insulation. So you'll note that the R value is higher on a women's specific air mat. And we're not talking self-inflating mats, but there's even cleverer technology built into those. Cedar Summit, Australians tend not to shout about how good they are at things. So I'm going to do it for them. So some of Cedar Summit's engineering is just off the charts good. If you want to tag a question on that at the end about some of the launch technologies that we had and still have, happy to expound on it. But women's sleeping mats were an extension of the other components of a woman's specific sleep system.
And I guess it was interesting to hear you talk about how it was kind of a balance for weight as well, because it'd be easy just to make a big wide square pad that can generally accommodate everyone, but then you are carrying around all that extra weight. Whereas if you make the shape of the pad specific to the user, you can save quite a bit of weight. And I think if people look at the difference between, you have the male oriented pad, the women specific pad, and then the big square ones as well. And people can go and take a look at all those and then all the weights. I think you have a nice table that shows all of them side by side. And I encourage people to kind of go take a look at that, because you'll see that it does create significant weight savings while not sacrificing comfort for different people at the same time. So
yeah, and Justin, that is specific to the fact that there's not one product that fits every single person. So having all of those different sizes, having that you could have a tapered or mummy fit mat, and you can also have a rectangle fit mat or a wide mat or a double mat. Having those availability or those pieces available allows for people to find the right fit for them, which is so important. All these things that we're talking about, it's so important that they find the right fit for them. What is this activity that they're doing? What is the space, the temperature, the weather that they're sleeping within, so they can have that most comfortable sleep? And as Barry said, there is no better conversation about that than the sleep system. I know we're just talking about mats. We can have a whole nother conversation on sleep system down the road. But it's funny, we actually have people call in and say, hey, I want to buy that sleep system. And then we have to explain, well, actually, there's not one. There's multiple options here. So,
definitely. And I want to jump into now what's coming down the pipe from Sea to Summit, because I think that's always something that I'm interested in, especially maybe from a technology standpoint. I think if there's things that Sea to Summit has identified that maybe it hasn't gone into the engineering phase yet, but maybe it's on the docket for maybe addressing one of the trade-offs in a sleeping pad that you want to kind of, maybe it's boost comfort, durability, warmth, weight. Is there anything that you guys can share with regards to that?
Well, I would like to keep my job, so I have to be careful. I've already mentioned, I think there are some interesting developments in insulation technology, and I would be surprised if there weren't more developments in that direction. I think you're going to hear the word sustainability a lot more. I don't know how true that is. We at Sea to Summit, on our frequently asked questions page, people are advised to stop and think a little before this idea of, oh, can I recycle a sleeping pad? No, you can't. Those materials have been laminated together. You cannot separate them. And we're not going to pretend by using greenwashing terms that you can. We actually have a clearly worded statement in our frequently asked questions section on the website that says, we're not interested in greenwashing. We're certainly not going to create the impression that you can send a sleeping pad back to us and we will dispose of it in some environmentally benign way, because that's just not possible. It's much better to look for a second life application for a lot of products, and sleeping pads included. You're going to hear the words sustainability. I think there are certain aspects within that where there will become available more materials that certainly will carry a blue sign designation. I can't say much more than that. Justin, Ryan.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
No, I think I was going to add on to a little bit of what Barry was saying there. I think this is a big part of all companies. It's not just Sea to Summit, and it's a big part of the outdoors in general, right? So to be in a space where there are products that all of us make in some way that have some struggles, whether that is the material availability for folks or the recyclability of the materials, and it's something that we as an organization take very seriously and are going to continue to grow, expand on, and drive as a big part of our company. I was going to say, one of the things that we as an organization also believe in, one of our values, is really that idea of doing the things that you didn't even know you needed. So one of those pieces is just really paying attention and listening to your listeners, all of the consumers that are sending us questions on the daily or providing feedback about the products that we make. So you've heard us talk a lot about sleep systems. So I think what we can promise you or tell you is that we have a lot of sleep system advancements and changes and things that are coming for us in coming years. And that is inclusive of some stuff that is within our mat space as well. And we will continue to do that always. But look for more from us in the sleep system space.
Interesting. Yeah, that's some those are some great tidbits, and I think I get a lot of comments from my viewers and my audience, and I'm all over the internet, kind of picking up little bits and pieces. And I think if there's a way to make the Etherlite X maintain the durability and comfort, make it a little bit warmer, a little bit less weight, I think people would be loving that. Anything else kind of before we kind of wrap up that you guys want to share? Make sure people know out there about particularly around comfort and sleeping pads, but anything else as well that you want to share with it? Any news with Sea to Summit or stuff that's coming down the pipe?
Well, with regard to sleeping mats specifically, I said Australians don't like it when people shout about how great they are. It's interesting culture. And obviously for your listeners, I'm assuming that most people know that Sea to Summit is an Australian company. If you didn't, we're located in Perth, Western Australia, which is the most remote capital city in the world. There's a big adventure playground right out the back door called the Outback, which is serious. So you're going to make gear. If you're going to play in Western Australia, you need to make gear that's going to go the distance. Where I think that we sometimes, I wouldn't use the term sell ourselves short, but where I think there's a bit of a perception gap. When we launched the sleeping mats, the idea of the air sprung cells was completely revolutionary. And it's not anymore. I mentioned the REI Flash, but for Canadian listeners, the MEC Vector. Very, very similar constructions and good. That does improve the brand. It does improve the breed. We had a flat valve when we launched in 2015. In those days, rotary valves were common. They had very poor airflow. You couldn't connect a pump to them. We had a pump at launch, and we then, 2 years later, decided we could do something even better, and we built an integrated pump into our stuff sack. And just little things like that I think maybe people should look at Cedar Summit and go, yeah, when they talk about engineering, it's actually engineers who are doing this stuff and coming up with ideas that make the product better. If you take that one last concept around the idea of durability, that the liquid extruded lamination process, we have never had a delamination. We've been selling mats for 8 years. And if you look at the track record of sleeping mats, a very, very large percentage of them, I don't have REI's current numbers. We used to have the REI in-house report, but a very large percentage of the mats that are returned fail because of something internal, a weld or that airproof barrier or both. So I would just like, when people are assembling those Venn diagrams and looking to see which items or which aspects are most important to them when they're buying a sleeping mat and by extension buying a sleep system, I'd like them to give some thought to the fact that, yeah, there's some people working quietly away in the background who've come up with a lot of the things that drive the market now, come up with them first, and their company would be Cedar Summit. So that may sound a little bit like a sales pitch. It isn't meant in that sense. I have profound respect for the engineers that I get to work with in Perth.
That's great, because I feel the same way. It's especially, it's great to mention those little things that I think can often be overlooked, but for some people can be major pain points. And like you mentioned, the valve and the inflation bag that doubles, the stuff sack that doubles as an inflation bag is genius, and those little things really add up. And I was testing, doing some additional testing on the Cedar Summit Telos tent over the past week. And you can see all those little things in that tent as well, like the little attention to detail things that really stack. I wouldn't in a couple of years, I would be surprised if the fly to stakeout point attachment system that Cedar Summit uses gets copied almost universally. Because that's a great system.
So the aluminum pieces that clip into the corners.
Yeah. Those pieces.
Genius. And
yeah.
No, it is. But it would have been very easy to have just gone and bought an off-the-shelf component, just as it years before with the valve. I'm sure it would have been a lot easier and a heck of a lot cheaper to have just bought an off-the-shelf valve. That multifunction valve was something that Cedar Summit designed and developed themselves. That's who we are.
It's great. What about you, Ryan? Anything or?
I was just going to say, we are an organization that, like I said, listens to everybody that sends in messages, and which we always appreciate. And oftentimes, and Justin, you know this, you can call in and talk to Barry. Barry will be there to listen to the questions that you have and answer them in a much more experienced manner that has done all of the things and tried all of the different products out there. So, and sometimes he gives advice that is not for Cedar Summit. And I always say, Barry, you can't do that. But he is absolutely there, and there's a real person that is there to talk to, and oftentimes with Barry. So just know that.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the openness, and like Barry and you and I have chatted before, and having that access is amazing, and yeah, being able to have frank conversations and honest conversations is very much appreciated. I appreciate both of your times. That was a great conversation, and I look forward to chatting again soon.